Howdy everybody, this is Omar, your audio amigo, here as promised with a Legacy review. Okay, jokes aside, this is the Thieaudio Legacy 2. This IEM first released all the way back in 2021, making it roughly 5 years old. At the time of writing, this is still Thieaudio's most affordable IEM, retailing at just $100 US. For that, you get a 10mm beryllium dynamic driver and a single nulls balanced armature. Time moves extremely fast in the IEM hobby. So is the Legacy 2 still a worthy contender here in 2026? Let's find out. The unboxing here does feel a little bit bare bones, but honestly, it's roughly in line with other $100 IEMs even today. Inside, you get the IEMs themselves attached to a non-modular 3.5mm cable, a cool blue magnetic carry case that's reminiscent of the one that Moondrop used to include on things like the Kato, and a selection of standard ear tips. You get small, medium, and large versions of both these solid core clear tips and a more standard set of black silicone tips. And that's basically it. There's nothing really fancy going on here, especially compared to some of the more generous IEMs at this price point with their modular cables and their premium ear tips. But as I said, for the majority of $100 IEMs out there, this is very much in line with the accessories that those other IEMs offer. You get a case and some basic ear tips. Would be nice if the cable was modular, but hey, 3.5 is fine. In my opinion, Thieaudio has been sort of hit or miss with stock cables. Fortunately, the one here on the Legacy 2 is, in my opinion, a winner. This is a silvery, sort of standard 4-wire braid with plastic sleeving on the outside. No microphonics, no memory, no problem. The amp connector is a 3.5mm only, but it is branded and has a nice little ring recessed into it for a better grip. The Y-split is not branded, but it matches the rest of the hardware, unlike the clear plastic chin slider, which honestly feels a little bit low rent here, but at least it works well to keep the cables controlled. The ear hooks here do not crinkle, but I really don't like the 2-pin connectors that Thieaudio has chosen here. There's no visible stereo indication on them at all, except for the color of the plastic connector itself, and honestly, that's a little bit hard to see in everyday use. I really wish Thieaudio had gone with a classic R or L letter on the connector, or the colored rings, as opposed to these sleek, featureless connectors. All in all, the cable is nice, but I personally would make a few small changes with the connectors and the chin slider. As I mentioned earlier, modular cables are starting to be more common at this price point, so it would be nice to see a 4.4 and USB-C option included in the box in the future. Build quality, however, is one area where I think you do start to feel the age here on the Legacy 2. More and more IEMs at this price point are full 3D printed resin, giving them some more durability, but as you can see here, the Legacy is going for the classic hollow approach with tubes connecting the drivers to the resin nozzle. That's not a bad build quality decision at all, and being able to see the drivers and the crossover board and the tubes is nice, but compared to a more modern 3D printed design, it does start to look a little bit old school. Fortunately, these shells do feature a pair of vents here on the side by the 2-pin connector, meaning no issues with pressure buildup or driver flex. All things considered, I think that these are very well built. I just think that they use an older sort of construction method. I'm not going to hold that against the Legacy 2, as there are much more expensive IEMs from other brands being produced today with this exact same construction methodology, but for the future, I think that a move to full 3D printed shells would be advisable for Thieaudio here. Time to take a look at the spec sheet, and the top story is, as I mentioned earlier, the driver configuration. The Legacy is using a 10mm beryllium dome dynamic driver and a single Knowles ED29689 for the mids and treble. You will need to watch your source selection here, as they will change sound with higher output impedance sources or with impedance adapters. As far as power goes, however, these are ridiculously easy to drive, so just keep an eye on your output impedance and you'll be fine with most sources. Weights and measures paint a pretty good potential for comfort. The shells weigh in at just under 4 grams a side, and the entire package is the lightest Thieaudio IEM that I have weighed. Nozzles are under the crucial 6mm mark, and the overall design is pretty typical for a 1+1 hybrid. But now it's time for the cool wall, and I have to say, I really like the look here on the Legacy 2. I do think that today that sort of swirly faceplate design has become quite samey. Lots of IEMs are going for this sort of design, but I think that most of Thieaudio's faceplate designs vary wildly from some that I think are really cool to some that I think are not as nice. What I think elevates this one compared to some of the other Thieaudio IEMs is the fact that they've gone with color matched resin on the shells here. If it was just the sort of blue faceplate, I don't think it would stand out a ton in today's market. However, with the color matched resin for the shells, I am going to put these in the cool section. I think Thieaudio did good here, and I think they should consider doing colored resin on some of their other IEMs. I think it would make the sort of cohesive design of the entire IEM go a bit better. But no matter how it looks, does a 5-year-old design have what it takes to please the women of the Council of Ladies? Well, honestly, it looks like yes. We have a unanimous verdict of pretty from all 5 ladies, although lady number 6, filling in for lady number 4, doesn't think that she would comment or compliment on these if she saw someone wearing them. Looking at their comments, there is a lot of love for the color and the overall design of the Legacy 2, which I have to say I can agree with. I do think that these are a little bit samey compared to some of the other swirly glittery shells today, but it's a very good showing in front of the ladies, and I think that they also appreciated the clear shells. As far as comfort goes, the Legacy 2 here are the smallest Thieaudio IEMs that I've ever experienced. The pseudo-custom shell design does have a little bit of a wing and a bit of a comfort bulge going on here, but honestly, for me, the size and shape are excellent, and thanks to the ventilation on the shells, I had no issues wearing these for hours and hours and hours at a time, no dry reflex, no pressure buildup. Best part about these IEMs though, my wife agrees. She scored these as like a glove, which is something crazy for Thieaudio. She's tried almost all of their IEMs, and every single one of them has failed the tiny ears test. So for these to pass is a pretty impressive feat here. That small nozzle combined with the small shells and the very lightweight meant that, yeah, she was able to wear it long enough to listen to it for several albums worth, and she really, really liked the shape and design of these. Thieaudio, more designs with this shell, please. I think the smaller eared populace would really like it. Now, however, it's time to talk sound, so we'll kick things off as always with the bass. The bass on the Legacy 2, I think, strikes a pretty good balance. It's not what I would call bassy or a bass head IEM, but the bass texture and quality that this IEM can generate is pretty good. It has a nice low, deep end energy. The deep heartbeat style bass drops in Teardrop, for example, sound pretty good here on the Legacy 2. They have the right amount of rumble and really good accuracy. They stop and start when they're supposed to. And those low piano notes hit really well here on this IEM. But I think I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. Mid-bass, as I just spoiled for myself, is also pretty fantastic. That big thumpy drum from Let's Groove, I think, has great energy and power, despite the rest of the song getting pretty busy and the rest of the instruments coming in and trying to spoil the party. You still have that big thumpy bass drum heartbeat going for the entire track. I think the bass here is very well executed. It's not quite as energetic as I would like. I would like a bit more bass here. However, despite that sort of slightly less energy than I would prefer, it's packed with emotion, rumble, and texture, and I think it's a very well executed bass presentation here. Because they showed restraint with the bass, the mids then become pretty unbothered from a tonal perspective. While there is a little bit of warmth here, it's in that nice rich way that, again, I really enjoy. Holiday, for example, still sounds articulate and detailed, and there is a little bit of extra energy to the lower guitar and bass notes, but it doesn't drown out or mask the drums and the vocals at all. I think it really helps this track sound a bit grungier and a bit more earthy. Really good replay overall, honestly. Female vocals, again, are well balanced, not super forward, but not recessed either. Callie's vocals in Go Getters are quite clean from a timbral perspective. I feel like because of her sort of vocal tonality, she can become husked over fairly quickly in some warmer IEMs, but that's not the case here on the Legacy 2. She feels just as impactful and just as clean as I typically expect. While the mids have a very slight warm tilt to them, it's not to the point where I think it becomes smeary or bloated, and they're also not anemic or thin either. I think there's a very nice balance that has been achieved here. Stop me if you've heard this one before, but female vocal harmonics are also balanced. Heart of Glass has Debbie Harry's consonant tones coming across nice and energetic on the Legacy 2, and they don't necessarily get bitey or annoying. The harmonic energy that this puts out suits her airy, dreamy vocals in this track rather well. It gives them a sense of dimension and emphasis, again, without becoming shouty or fatiguing. And the story continues into the treble. The sparkle and shimmer on the harmonics is enough that things don't sound flat, but not so much that things get fatiguing. For example, the cymbals in Blinded and Changed, specifically the bell hits on the cymbals in the bridges, they never get piercing or bitey. However, there's enough harmonic content that that China cymbal that gets hit every now and then has that vinegary sound that China cymbals are so famous for. My only complaint about the treble is that I do think it could use a bit more energy in the upper air treble frequencies. Not a huge deal to me overall, but I think Thieaudio did a very, very good job tuning this IEM all across the range. The technical performance on the Legacy 2 is good, but not earth-shattering. There are two very good drivers in here, and I feel that they've done a good job tuning them. Just don't expect this to box above its weight in terms of resolution or detail retrieval. The bass, the drums, and the piano in Christmas Time Is Here all comes through very cleanly and beautifully. The bass strings have a nice resonance and buzziness to them. You can hear the fingers hitting the strings to mute the sound, and all that's communicated very well here on the Legacy 2. I think that the Beryllium driver is doing very well here. The background conversation in Waltz for Debbie is clearly audible without being overpowering or distracting, and all of the glassware moments that I typically listen for are all present and easy to hear. Now, what I said earlier holds true. I don't think this IEM reaches things like the Supermix 4 or the Nova in terms of pure detail retrieval or technical performance, but I do think that it mixes things up in its price range. Things like the Defiant, the EM6L, and the Aria 2, it can trade blows with quite well. Perceived 3D soundstage and stereo separation are strong points for the Legacy 2. Songs with distinct stereo effects like Mockery are replayed very well here, with the synthesized cymbal hits sort of moving and echoing from ear to ear, and the oscillating drops moving around. They're all very clearly rendered from side to side here on Legacy 2. In tracks that have more spatial or live style mastering, like In a Sentimental Mood, the Legacy 2 does well with rendering the specific locations of the drum kit, the piano, the saxophone, and the bass guitar, and it doesn't feel like all of that spatial detail is getting compressed down into a single sort of in-head image. I think it's definitely a bit above average compared to other IEMs at this price point, at least in terms of imaging and perceived 3D soundstage. But now let's talk about those impedance effects that I hinted at. Pulling up the graph, you can see that the Legacy gets a good deal more V-shaped with higher levels of output impedance. The mids fall back, the bass gets a big boost, and the upper mids and treble also jump up a little bit. This gives the Legacy a much more excitable tuning. The dynamic driver honestly takes that bass boost really well. It didn't distort, at least the volumes I'm listening at. And while that tuning isn't necessarily my preference, I can see people using an impedance adapter once in a while to get that tuning for some, just crazy fun. All right then, for an IEM that is now 5 years old, I think that the tuning here on the Legacy 2 has held up remarkably well over the years. The old adage that good audio stays good has held true yet again. In terms of overall tuning, I would say that this is a very mild V-shape, maybe even a neutral-ish tuning here on the Legacy 2, and I really don't think it puts a toe out of line. It does nothing wrong. It's got enough energy that I don't find it boring, but it also doesn't take any risks. But how well has it held up for the last half decade? Why don't we bring in some more recent sets and see if it can still hang? Why don't we start with the new hotness from Truthear, the Pure, priced at $90 US. I mentioned earlier that the Legacy 2 can come across as a mild V-shape. Well, that's certainly the case next to the Pure. The Pure might not be as rumbly in the sub-bass, but it is generally a more mid-forward signature compared to the Legacy 2. The treble presentation is remarkably similar, but female vocal harmonics I found to be more forward on the Legacy 2 versus the Pure. A big non-audio difference here is the construction. Remember earlier when I mentioned full 3D printed shells? Well, the Pure is a perfect example of that technology put to use. The Pure just feels more solid and better put together in the hands compared to the Legacy 2. That said, it is also a bit heavier, and my wife didn't find them as comfortable as the Legacy 2 was. The Pure is definitely a more neutral sounding IEM than the Legacy 2, but if you want a little bit more energy in the bass and treble and you like lighter weight shells, I think the Legacy 2 can make a fantastic alternative. Next up is a bit of a crowd favorite and one of the most popular IEMs at this price point. It is the Juzear X Z-Review's Defiant. Now let me be straight up here. Being between these two, it becomes pretty apparent that these two are very, very similar in terms of overall tonality and tuning. But there are differences here that I think will steer folks towards one or the other. If you're one of those people who thought that the bass on the Defiant was a little bit soft, then the Legacy 2 might be more to your tastes. I found the bass on the Legacy 2 a bit more textured, a bit less woolly, for lack of a better word. The Defiant, however, did come across a bit cleaner and a bit more resolving to my ears than the Legacy 2. Legacy 2 was a bit more emotional and full-bodied in the lower mids. Part of that is due to the Defiant having an airier treble presentation, but the Legacy 2 also has a bit of extra heft in that lower mid area. This is the warmer, slightly less clear sound. This is the clearer, thinner sound, but with woolly bass. What I will say is, if you have smaller ears, or you thought the Defiant's bass was too woolly, or it gave you pressure buildup issues, then I think the Legacy 2 can be a blast from the past that may be exactly what you're looking for. Next up is a very popular set at this price point, the Simgot EM6L Phoenix, which has been price increased recently to $125 US. First thing I noticed was the EM6L was a good bit brighter than the Legacy 2 in my A/B comparison. That's to be expected. I did find the imaging to be a little bit better on the EM6L, but that won't matter as much if you find the EM6L fatiguing. While I personally don't, I know lots of people do think that this is just that little bit too sizzly in the upper end of the spectrum. The EM6L has a similar warmth in the lower mids to the Legacy 2, but it doesn't rumble as hard in the sub bass as the Legacy 2 can. I still absolutely love the Phoenix. I think it's one of my favorite Simgot sets, but if you're willing to trade in some detail, some resolution, and some staging for a bit more of that sub bass rumble and an overall less fatiguing tonality, Legacy 2 might be the play. Lastly, we have another one of my favorite IEMs, another sort of crowd favorite heavy hitter. It's also blue. We have the AFUL Explorer at $120 US. The Explorer's bass is a bit more aligned with my personal preference than the Legacy. It's that little bit punchier, that little bit rumblier, that little bit more dynamic sounding without sacrificing any of the texture or quality that you get on the Legacy 2. The Explorer isn't as forward with female vocal harmonics, but it does have that little bit of airiness that the Legacy 2 doesn't quite have. The Explorer generally comes across to me as more mid-centric and warmer overall. This is also a fully 3D printed shell, but if you love female vocals and the Explorer isn't quite scratching that itch, then hey, Legacy 2 is here. Okay then, wrap-up time. For today, I'm going to go with lower mids, heft, and weight, which I think will be an interesting way to sort of sort these. At the top of the list, with what I think is the most mid-centric tonality, we have the Truthear Pure. Plenty of weight in the lower mids, but thanks to that more constrained bass, it doesn't get cloudy, muddy, or obscured. Some people might think it's boring sounding, but it's slightly north of neutral tuning I think is pretty awesome. I really need to get off my butt and review this. It is coming, I promise. Next up, we have the AFUL Explorer. This has lower mids heft like the Pure, but it is packing the most bass forward tuning of anything here on the table. It's got less upper mids than basically everything here on the table, but still has decent air and pretty good treble. It's popular for a reason, it's relaxing, it's smooth, it's the Explorer. Next, you have the Simgot EM6L Phoenix. This has the most treble energy of anything here on the table, but it has some heft in the lower mids to help balance it out a little bit, at least to my ears. Thinking about it, other than the ET142, I think this is my second favorite, Simgot IEM, ET142, and then this. It's a good combination of lower mids warmth and that layer of treble detail. It just works for my ears, and I don't find this as fatiguing as, for example, things like the EA500LM. Next, in terms of mid-bass heft, comes the Legacy 2. This is a mild V-shape with nice body in the lower mids, forward vocal harmonics, and a controlled upper treble. Maybe this tuning was a little bit ahead of its time. Lastly, with the cleanest and sort of leanest lower mids is the Defiant. I don't think this comes across as lean or thin at all, but in this group, it is the leanest in the lower mids. This is yet another crowd-pleasing IEM, and Zeos is rightfully proud of its energetic yet clean tuning. I think the simple fact that the Legacy 2 is mixing it up with sets like these four very popular, very highly recommended sets should tell you just how well its tuning has held up over the last 5 years. But to go ahead and quantify how well it's held up, we're going to go ahead and bring up the Audio Amigo arbitrary rating scale and find out where she lands. I honestly do think the Legacy might have been a bit ahead of its time at release. Reviews at the time praised the tuning, but called it too safe and lacking in technical performance. The thing is, most of the reviews I saw at the time were comparing it against IEMs in the $150 to $200 range. And while yes, the Legacy 2 doesn't compete with any of those IEMs in terms of resolution or detail retrieval, Its tuning is pretty darn good, and the drivers in here are very capable and I think are doing a good job. Is this the best $100-ish hybrid IEM? I don't think so, but I think it's very, very close to all of the top recommendations of today, and depending on your personal tastes, this could beat out one or more of these, depending on what you specifically like. In my opinion, the biggest wins for the Legacy 2 are comfort, mid-range presence, and bass texture. And while overall, if I had to pick one of these, I do find myself still preferring the AFUL Explorer for its heft and warmth, or the EM6L for its detail and imaging, compared to the Defiant at least, I would take the Legacy 2, mostly because it doesn't give me pressure buildup issues like this did, and it has that heftier lower mids presentation. So because it's competing with these four, I'm going to put this up in the This is Brilliant tier. I legitimately think that if you're shopping for an IEM in the $100 price class, you should at least be considering the Legacy 2. But who do I think should pick up a Legacy over these? Well, to mention that, if you already have Defiant, Pure, EM6L, or Explorer, I wouldn't recommend this because you won't really get much of an upgrade here. It's a bit more of a side grade. You won't see an increase in detail retrieval or resolution here on the Legacy 2. I also would not recommend this IEM to people who are looking for big boomy bass or very sparkly airy highs because probably not going to find them here. If, however, you've been rocking a budget IEM for a while but haven't pulled the trigger on a $100 upgrade just yet, I think the Legacy 2 deserves very serious consideration, especially if you want something that's that little bit warmer than the Defiant, but not quite as warm as the Explorer. I also think this makes a pretty great sounding tiny ears IEM, at least if your ears are similar in size and shape to my wife. Throw some extra small tips on there, slide it on in, and you should be good for hours and hours of listening, just like she was. Lastly, if you do find one of these on the secondhand market, I think these can be a fantastic pre-owned pickup. I've seen these on eBay, Reddit, and other places selling for between $55 and $75 on the used market, and for that price, I think this IEM is an absolute steal. And that's it for the Thieaudio Legacy 2. This is a pretty sweet little IEM, and as I keep saying, it shows that good audio stays good. I really do think it would make a great choice for people shopping in this price range, and at my booth in HiFiCon, where I had all 400 plus of my IEMs for people to try, there were a lot of people both new to the hobby and collectors that were surprised by the sound here on the Legacy 2. And there were a good mix of people who tried both Defiant and Legacy 2, and they kind of split 50-50. I had some people preferring Defiant and some people preferring Legacy 2. So yeah, consider it if you're shopping in this price range. That's going to do it for me today. I really hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you all so very much for watching. I hope you have a great day. This has been Omar, your audio amigo. Goodbye.